Yeah. I was just on a clubhouse space actually, and I got kicked off because somebody came up, started shilling. I was talking about the benefits of Bitcoin. It was like 600 people in this clubhouse room, and Grant Cardone was in there, and so was Brian something or other. He's got like 100,000 followers, and finally we were having a productive conversation about Bitcoin. And some .eth person came in and was like, "Yeah, but Bitcoin's too expensive. Nobody can afford a Bitcoin. You have to go
Oh,
and look
brother.
down at the cheaper coins." And anyways,
Okay.
I raised my voice a little bit, and they didn't like that, kicked me off.
Didn't you get kicked out of a Spaces yesterday as
I
well?
did, yes, yesterday too. Mike, you were listening to that, were
Yeah,
you?
yeah. It's
that
funny.
lady, that lady had just like no sane thoughts to rub together. She was just like spewing nonsense, and then I tried to like have an actual conversation with some guy who was like, I just don't understand why the crypto community doesn't like Hex and Pulse Chain. And I kind of wanted to actually engage him into the conversation because I like to do that and actually deeply explore these topics. And the lady's just like, she just muted me and she was like, "You will listen to me. I have the moderation status. I have a heavy badge and I am responsible for all 12 people in this room." So then I told her thoughts were useless and that she wanted to hear something good. She should listen to me. And then she kicked me out.
Brad, but you're an early Hex investor, isn't that right?
Yeah. Anyways, about that. Oh, we're live. I think. Are we live?
I saw it go live.
All right. It usually takes a few minutes or a few seconds, but I will cut out the first part and we'll just go from here for when I post this on the podcast. And Mags, you're muted still. You got to unmute.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Greg, Mike, and Mags for coming on the Magic Internet Money Show. I wanted to do a conversation with some Canadian Bitcoiners, and you guys are from different parts of Bitcoin. You guys are people that I follow from different parts of Bitcoin. Consider you guys all friends, and we have different opposing views on some things, but I think we're all pretty much in alignment that it feels like Canadians are kind of getting screwed here with inflation. And I don't know, Mike and Mags, if you've heard Greg talk much about his experience in the bond markets and the risks of Canada's debt being downgraded and things like that. But I just thought it would be cool to have this conversation where it's like Mike's always been a centrist in Bitcoin, and I always respect his opinions and followed him for years. And he's wearing his daughter's headphones. And I thought it would be cool to have a conversation that you don't typically see in Bitcoin podcasts where everybody's in agreement on the same thing. Like, I'm sure we're going to have a slight disagreements here and then, but thanks for coming on the show. And I don't know where to go with this. Why don't I would actually like to hear, Greg, like your thoughts on the current situation with inflation in Canada and how you're positioning for that.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Brad. It's good to talk to you as always. And then Mags, nice to see you again. And Mike in Space, we've never personally met, but I have followed your stuff for as long as I've been on Twitter, which has been just over a year, I guess, or a year and change. But great to meet you guys. Yeah, as Canadians, we have some big problems. There's two realities in the world. There are inflation pressures as well as inflationary expectations. As an aside, there's a question as to whether the world is actually measuring those inflation pressures correctly. And I'll throw out a statistic from the USA. Although reported inflation CPI basket is 7% year over year, if you actually used the original CPI formula, which was published in 1980, so 40 years ago, that original formula would have inflation at over 15% year over year. Okay, so the CPI basket changes over time.
Yeah.
And in allowing the basket to change, they can dampen some of the output. But let's assume that inflation is running at least at 7% year over year. Bonds are yielding in the USA, the most important benchmark in the world, the 10-year US Treasury bond is yielding 1.85%. And which means a real yield after you subtract out inflation is 1.85% minus 7%, means you're earning, or you're actually getting a yield of negative 5.15% on your bonds, which means you're not keeping up with inflation. And then more importantly, when you lend $100 to someone at time zero, and in 10 years, you're highly likely to get that $100 back from the Federal Reserve or the US Treasury. But the reality is that $100 has far less purchasing power than it did at time zero, right? So you're losing doubly in bonds. The Canadian situation is worse, but Canada doesn't matter on a global economic stage. Canada is a G7 nation. I've gone and said to publicly on Twitter, and as well to some Canadian politicians, that Canada will be the first G7 country to fail, i.e. default on their debt obligations. And that's just pure mathematics, because Canada is smaller, has a smaller economy than California. It's got a less diverse economy, meaning, we're like a ribbon that stretches 5,000 kilometers. We're not horizontally and vertically integrated like the USA is. So lots of reasons to have concern in Canada, but then there's some positives. And I will tell you, and this is, I'm not sharing any secrets. Pierre Poilievre and I had a conversation on Friday evening. Now, I talk to Pierre all the time. I encourage any listeners that haven't seen his performance in the House of Parliament, where he talked about the history of money. It was absolutely off the charts brilliant.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
He's incredibly concerned for the future of our children, Canadian children, as I am. And if we get more politicians like him, that's going to be positive for Bitcoin adoption. Now, he does own Bitcoin. I'll be very clear about that. I helped him buy Bitcoin, but he has not formally endorsed Bitcoin. What he has formally endorsed is sound money. And I'll draw the blank. I believe that Bitcoin is the best sound money there is, and therefore he is endorsing a call for Bitcoin, in my opinion. Now, that's me filling in the blanks. Don't run out and say that Foss said that Pierre is endorsing Bitcoin. But I think he's doing the research. And one final note, I did give a presentation to 45 members of parliament in Canada on Bitcoin. Nice. Okay, so
recently?
This was just before Christmas, probably at the beginning of December. Yeah, beginning of December.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so they're getting the message. There's a lot of informed politicians in Canada. Pierre Poilievre, Ben Lobb, who is the member from the Barrie Huron-Bruce, which includes one of Canada's largest nuclear reactors, the Bruce nuclear reactor. The Bruce nuclear reactor actually pays Americans to take excess energy in off hours from the nuclear reactor. We pay the Americans.
Taxpayer money does that?
Of course it does. It's taxpayer money. Wow. And one solution obviously would be, now it's not an easy solution and it's perhaps far down the road, but wouldn't it be more wise to mine Bitcoin in the off-peak hours when what happens is in a nuclear generator, the reason you have to pay someone to take the power is because if no one's taking the power, the grid, it has to go somewhere. And you can't power up and down. You can't power up and down a nuclear reactor. Okay. It's spewing out a certain amount of power and you have to find
it's several days for a nuclear reactor.
Anyway, they don't do it on an hourly basis. Let's just and so they're trying to connect the dots. Is it possible to mine Bitcoin with the excess power? It's a long way to go, but at least people are asking the question. So yeah, a long-winded answer. Canada has a lot of problems, but at least there's people that are trying to address these problems. The biggest problem we have right now, I have to go on record, is a prime minister who says stuff like the budget will balance itself. And forgive me if I don't care about monetary policy. Those are the kinds of statements that if you were the CEO of a company, you'd be fired on the spot, right? So not leaning one way or the other, but when you have a buffoon as a prime minister, a buffoon as a mathematician. He's a prime minister who is very poor at math. Those are dangerous for the future of our kids, and I think we need to take note.
Can I bring up one point? I
Sure.
think Bitcoin almost creates a perverse incentive here, because I think Pierre Poilievre is great, and that was a great video, but no one has increased the value of my Bitcoin portfolio and my real estate portfolio more than Trudeau. And if he runs again, I mean, it's kind of in my interest to vote for the buffoon, not the guy who's going to bring in sound
Oh
money.
no.
Well, that's
It's true, isn't
amazing.
it?
It is, except we got to be careful what we wish for. And a lot of Bitcoin maxis in the US wish for the downfall of, the US dollar. And I'm very clear. I don't want that to happen. I think it will be absolutely catastrophic for world order. And the same token, I don't want Canada to default on our debt. So I don't want a prime minister. While in the short term, yes, it would increase the value of your Bitcoin. Bitcoin's set globally. The price of Bitcoin is set globally. And no one cares about Canada, Mike. I mean, seriously, on a global scale, very few people care about Canada.
Yeah,
And
but I'm
so,
getting
They
paid in
love
CAD.
Canadians.
I'm getting paid in CAD, right? And
Yes.
my real estate's in Canada. So, I mean,
Right.
that all works to my advantage.
you're getting paid in CAD, but
I
isn't
think
the
the point-
CAD debasing faster than
Exactly. So I
think
take
what-
that
I think,
CAD
like-
and I convert it to Bitcoin.
Right. Okay.
Well,
All right.
Hard assets, yeah.
Mike, I think what the disconnect is that you were right that if you vote for Trudeau, then it will increase your Canadian real estate portfolio, but not your Bitcoin. Like, that's what the disconnect there. Greg is saying that the Bitcoin conversation is not impacted by what Canadians do. It's more about what the U.S. does and the Federal Reserve. But for us in Canada, yeah, it does feel like it's a bit of a perverse incentive, because we're benefiting not as much as the people that are as close to the money printer as the banks and the insiders there, but we are still benefiting by the fact that we have this monetary privilege here, and we've got assets, and we've got the assets not sitting in cash, but sitting in assets that are going to benefit from all this buffoonery that's happening everywhere. But I think it's probably smart to recognize that if it continues, there's only so much of that will make sense. Like, at some point, it's just going to blow up. I don't know. It seems like it's gotta, like Jeff Booth talks about this, like Bitcoin as the transitionary period. Like, I think that will kind of be the lifeboat analogy. I think that's legitimate. But if things just keep going one way, where money printing continues and low interest continue, market manipulation continues, at some point everything is going to blow up. And probably Bitcoin too is going to be like a negative 80, 90% at some point. Everything is just going to explode. And then, like, long-term, Bitcoin's going to be fine, but it will be super volatile. Like, I mean, we just had a 50% drawdown from, what was it, 2 months ago or 3 months ago when we made the 69K top. So that's kind of one of the other reasons I want to talk to you guys. Like, things are crazy right now. I mean, Mags, you work with the government too. You work with CoinKite, like the Rodolfo and the company that makes Open Dimes and all the awesome Bitcoin hardware. Yeah, I got the block clock behind me there. You also work with the government, like you've worked with regulators on the big fraud case that happened when the big exchange shut down. What was it called again?
Quadriga. Yeah, that's still ongoing.
What are your conversations like when you're talking to regulators and government folks? Do you still try to orange pill them or what?
I think it's a challenge. So I spent a decade in government, largely around economic development, innovation, making sure our industry remains competitive in Canada, particularly as we transition to this low carbon economy, we shift our energy system. And the one thing to keep in mind is that when you're in a senior position, you are over, especially, like Pierre, conservative leader. What happens is you oversee everything, right? So it's not just monetary policy, it's social stuff, it's the environment, it's all the different sectors, it's small businesses, like you healthcare, and trying to understand an industry like Bitcoin, which is a subset of, they would probably put it under like a subset of either technology or for the financial services sector, it's challenging for them because they don't usually do such deep dives into subsectors. And the part that makes it extra challenging is it's not just something that like if you talk about, I don't know, let's say biotech, it's biotech, right? But this, like, you're tackling so many different areas, right? So it's, again, the monetary policy, economics, but you start getting into philosophy, even some people get into religion, but it's not just that, it's understanding the energy system, which on its own has always been a very complex topic. So I worked for the Ministry of Energy for a few years, and briefings on energy were some of the most complex presentations we ever developed. Way more than even like healthcare decks that I've seen, because the energy system is so complex. And for most people, it just seems like this black box, like, why is my energy price going up on my bill? And so you have to understand all these kind of complex issues. And I think that's a challenge because there are too many things for them to sort of start to connect, and it will take some time. What is really neat now is we're finally, it's been 5 years. So I remember 5 years ago going up to my deputy and trying to advocate for mining, right? I was telling them at the time that we have these pulp and paper mills that are going out of business and you could have an additional revenue stream. You stick in some miners, right? There's some heat recovery that can be done. 5 years ago, I was having this conversation and it was before its time. Right. And at the time, the kind of like the consensus or the concerns were, well, isn't Bitcoin involved in money laundering? And, you know, the typical type of, it's a bubble concerns. And it was too early. But we're at this time now where Bitcoin companies have made a lot of capital, have invested a lot of capital. They're publicly listed, and they're starting to get involved in the political game. They're starting to get involved in lobbying in a highly organized manner. So, you know, I know this is a very Canadian kind of perspective. So I've seen myself, a number of Canadian organizations try to come together before. It was like a Bitcoin association, a blockchain association, but it never persisted. And the biggest challenge there is they didn't have enough money to throw at people to work full time on this. And you need that because you need to go talk to ministers. You need to talk to deputies. You need to talk to the policy staff at the ground level who will then bring this information up. And you need to cover provinces. You need to cover at the national level. Maybe sometimes it's even mayors in certain towns. Perhaps it's one that used to have a steel mill that shut down or some other heavy industrial player. So you need a lot of resources to be expended to sort of start that conversation going and to, rise up against any kind of misconceptions. And so what's really cool is I am seeing groups come together like Stat Center. I mean, Coin Center too has been around forever, but we're starting to see this kind of development, which I saw ages ago, where you have, for example, in Canada, you have Canadian manufacturers and exporters, which is all sorts of industry and businesses that come together. But then you also have individual groups like the Steel Association of Canada, Cement Association of Canada, which have their own very specific issues. And we're starting to see that, whether that's with mining or more specifically Bitcoin, rather than broader crypto that has sometimes competing incentives or things they want to push forward. So I think we're starting to get to the point where the industry is getting taken more serious. We're seeing the hearings in the US. I'm a little disappointed we don't have any in Canada, but there is money behind it to start sort of that education campaign to help understand those complex topics. And also when they go to a specific minister, let's say it's one like energy, or one that's economic development, they can create specific narratives that politician would care about.
Mags, I'm going to put you in touch with Pierre unless you already speak with him.
No, I have not. Thanks.
I'm going to connect you because I think what you just said will go a long way to helping him for the reason he called me on Friday night. Okay, so there's no secrets that we talk, but I think that you could add a whole lot of very valuable help to him. And someone brought up Jeff Booth. I mean, Jeff Booth is instrumental for Canadians in terms of understanding Bitcoin, but he's also a friend of Pierre. So that's how Pierre, I got introduced to Pierre, was through Jeff Booth.
I think we do need to do something like they've done in the States with Sat Center and the Bitcoin Today coalition. There's a couple of really cool political lobbying groups and political education groups that are doing good work to try to do what you said, Mags, and get in and have those conversations, and especially educate the staffers, educate the young people. There's this kid on Twitter Spaces all the time, Tristan. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? Tristan, I can't remember his last name now, but he works with the Liberals in like online strategy, and he got his like master's in like cryptocurrency studies, and he's like a Bitcoin maximalist.
I do know. I've heard. Is it Tristan LaMonica or something like that?
Yeah,
Tristan,
LaMonica,
Tristan. Yeah, absolutely. He's
So
a very
there's
interesting
young,
kid.
like
Yeah.
there's young people, there's young Canadians that are like in the government and doing their bit part to kind of like what Mike said, you know, it's almost like it's in our best interest that they keep making these dumb mistakes, because it helps us gain financial power. But you kind of want to hedge that with education and making sure that they're not going to keep making these dumb mistakes. And I think it's a great idea to invest in and organize these efforts in Canada. I mean, I'd be happy to donate to a group like that, send some sats over to help do that.
My understanding is that SAT Center is more North American. I will be participating in the first meeting in February.
Nice.
I'll find out more.
So
but again, it's one of those things. Sorry, one quick thing. It is one of those things where you need resources, right? Continued resources so they can hire permanent staffers, and you know, especially like we would need one just for Canada, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to donate if an effort gets set up. I mean, there's probably a bunch of Bitcoiners that would throw some money to something like that. So if anyone wants to do that, there's probably money to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably important, because otherwise you're going to have something like Coin Center start up, and they're going to do the whole mining FUD, right? Like, they're not our friends, you know? And it's good that there's SAT Center now, because the alternatives, they're just FUDding Bitcoin.
I don't think Coin Center FUD Bitcoin.
You know, like, I don't think they FUD Bitcoin, but I agree that they're not. There's a sort of like a competing agenda,
right? Exactly,
with Coin Center, because they're funded by Consensus, and Consensus is trying to get them to lobby to make proof of stake and Ethereum not classified as a security. And you know, that's just a fact. Like, they're not out there to push forward Bitcoin agenda. They're out there to push forward Ethereum and Bitcoin agenda, and those two things compete.
Have they not said some anti-proof of work things over the years?
I don't think so.
US? No,
I don't think so. They were pretty protective from what I read.
Okay.
That's
Bitcoin.
That's Ripple,
yeah.
Mike.
Ripple no, that's that guy in the hearing, the link guy.
Oh, the link. Yeah, but like the people that are at Consensus for sure have anti-proof of work and anti-Bitcoin propaganda. They fund that stuff. I mean, like, and Coin Center lobbies on behalf of Ethereum Foundation and Consensus. So in a way, it's kind of not in best interest of Bitcoin holders to be donating to an organization like Coin Center. They've done great work for Bitcoin in the past, but I'm just glad now that we have SAT Center and Bitcoin Today Coalition and stuff like that, because we can now send our money where 100% of the effort is going towards, like, in consensus of what we think about Bitcoin, versus 50% Bitcoin, 50% trying to convince the SEC that Ethereum is not a security. And that's the podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But I did want to come back to just the reality of the situation currently is prices of houses have gone insane over the last year and a half, 2 years since the pandemic started. And we're seeing in the stock market right now, in the US stock market, like, prices are coming off. Like, some of these stocks are trading like shit coins. Like, Netflix sold off 30% or something the other day. Peloton's down like 80% in the last few months. This, like, the stock market just does feel like what Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time is kind of starting to come to fruition. Like, the easy money seems to be kind of coming to an end.
50% of all NASDAQ stocks, well, more than one half of all NASDAQ stocks are off 50% from their highs, all-time high. So
that's insane.
Yeah. So the problem with it, well, not the problem, the reality with an index that's dominated by Apple, which is 15% of the index, Apple's only off a couple of percent. Therefore, NASDAQ as a whole is only down 12% to start the year, but there are plenty of stocks that are down over 50%. And, it's painful. That's for sure. But the reality is there's only one asset left, right? For a pension fund. Well, I should say there's only one traditional asset left for a pension fund to make its bogey. If you think of equities and bonds as the two large traditional asset classes, if one of your asset classes is yielding for a number, bonds as a whole class, including junk bonds, structured credit, essentially might be yielding 3%, with the US 10-year at 180. And if your pension fund has a target return, annual return of over 8% in order for it to be termed fully funded, where are they going to make that up? They need to make it up in the equity markets, right? And this is what politicians have to be so concerned with.
That last thing that you said, fully funded, can you say that for like
Sure.
people like
basically,
me and Mike?
yeah. Well, okay. So look, pension accounting is it's like actuarial accounting. It's a dismal science where you have a defined benefits for a group of pensioners that need a certain assumed rate of return over time in order to be able to pay out those defined benefits, right? And these pension funds make assumptions that they can earn 8% annually for their whole fund. It doesn't mean what asset class, it means the whole fund. So CalPERS, the largest pension fund in the USA, the California Pension Employee Retirement System, or whatever CalPERS stands for, they have a hurdle rate of 7.5% annually. Now, they've decided in their infinite wisdom, given that bond yields are so low, they're actually going to start levering. They're going to borrow money to try and increase their returns in the asset silos. That's not going to end well. Okay.
Has that ever happened before?
Other pension funds? It hasn't. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of pension funds that have done it, but I'm sure aware of places like Long-Term Capital Management that levered themselves 100 to 1 and almost brought down Wall Street in 1999. Right?
It doesn't seem like pension funds should be taking leverage.
I would agree with that, but the biggest one in the USA has decided that's the way they're going to meet their bogey. Now they're going to start levering returns rather than
I'm just curious if they expect government to bail them out if it goes downhill.
Well, the government bails them out indirectly, Mags, and this is the greatest thing that you just set me up for. Like, thanks for the lob ball pitch. The government bails them out because the equity market has to keep going up, or else all these pensioners define themselves as, oh my God, I don't have my pension. So it's called the put, right? The Fed put. When equity markets under Alan Greenspan declined by about 20%, the Fed cut rates even when there was no recession. The Fed cut rates to rescue the equity markets. That Fed put has probably moved to somewhere around 10%, which incidentally is what the NASDAQ market is bumping up against right now after only 1 month in the new year. This QT, quantitative tightening, that the Fed is trying to implement is going to fail miserably, okay? And quantitative easing, which is the only solution to the fiat Ponzi, will continue unabated, and you better own hard assets that will take advantage of a debasing currency. So wouldn't it be wonderful, instead of CalPERS embracing leverage to enhance their returns, they actually looked at the best returning asset over the last 10 years and add that into their portfolio mix, meaning Bitcoin? I mean, for pensioners everywhere, including all Canadian pension funds, that is absolutely a necessity to add an exposure to Bitcoin to protect future pension valuations.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Mike, you were going to say something?
Do you think the rates are going to rise? I know they're kind of floating that in the market just crash.
I don't think so.
Through?
Yeah, Mike, I don't think firstly, the pure mathematics of it is rates cannot rise substantially without accelerating the debt spiral so materially, because the debt balloon already is growing and outpacing the growth of the economy just because of the coupon. What happens if the coupon goes higher? That debt balloon goes and accelerates quicker, right? So I don't believe they can do it, but they're trying to jawbone the market to say that we are going to fight inflation using the traditional methodology, which is raising short-term interest rates, and how that impacts the rest of the yield curve remains to be seen. The pure mathematics they can try and do it, but I think what will happen first is equity markets will absolutely shit the bed. And the politicians are going to be in midterm elections are going to say, we can't go into a midterm election when the stock market's down 30%.
Right.
So
and in Canada, we have to just follow along regardless.
Oh, that's always, If there's only one central bank, well, there's two central banks in the world that matter. The Fed and the European Central Bank. Canada's like a rounding error. Thanks for showing up. We don't even care about you guys. You can pretend that you're important, Mr. Trudeau, but you're nothing but a buffoon. So just understand that we got to focus on two central banks in the world. And when I said that Canada could be the first G7 nation to fail, the only reason that other G7 nations that are in worse shape than Canada, like Italy and France, won't fail before Canada is because of European Central Bank backing for those two countries. So Canada only has the Bank of Canada, whereas the basket cases in Europe have the European Central Bank.
So in the situation where Canada, because we don't have as much economic weight as Europe or US, and we are just following the leader here and when it comes to monetary policy, but we're also on the other side of it, paving our own path of universal basic income and more like pro-socialist policies and stuff like that, which costs a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw Pierre Poilievre said something recently about the debt, both public and private, in Canada is like $9 trillion now.
Crazy.
which translates to like 370% debt to GDP ratio, which is insanity. And like 2 years ago, it was like 170, 180, and that was crazy. So like for every dollar a Canadian makes, they're like over $3 in debt. You know,
you got it. That's the simple math. So let's play a math game here.
How does that make?
Well, it doesn't. So let's make sure we play this math game so that you guys understand. I hope I can explain it to you and then anyone listening. When your debt or your numerator, your total debt to GDP is 4 times or 3.71 to make the math easy. It was in Canada 3.71 times, 371%. At 4 times, you have a coupon you need to pay on that debt, right? That's what a bond is, a contractual obligation to pay an interest coupon. Let's put an average interest coupon on all of the debt that we're talking about of 3%, okay? That means your numerator organically is growing at 4 times 3%, which means it's growing at 12%. In order for your tax base or your GDP to keep pace with your numerator, GDP has to grow at 12% annually. Is that going to happen? Not likely. Therefore, your numerator is growing, your debt spiral is accelerating, and there's nothing you can do. That is why we Bitcoin. Very simply, the thing that solves that is more printing. They have to solve this debt spiral. And the way they solve it is by printing more money. And when you print more money, the value of your house appears to go up because the value of that money as a unit of account goes down. So the truth is, nobody in Canada has really made any money on their house. Mm-hmm. They've just made money when you account for it using a crappy thing called fiat. But measure your house in other things like gold or other hard assets like Bitcoin, and you've actually lost money. But let's not go there right now, okay?
Yeah, you don't actually get purchasing power growth. You actually stay flat or lose purchasing power over time.
That's all fiat debasement is. And by extension, that's all inflation is as well. Prices go up because the value of your dollar goes down.
And they've made it almost impossible for young people to buy a house. Like my brother's an apprentice and he's just crushed right now because housing prices have gone up 50% over the last 2 years.
There is one thing I wanted to add. So with housing in Canada, particularly with the primary residence, there's no capital gains, and you can borrow like, what is it, 80%. So there's leverage there. So I mean, yeah, I hear what you're saying, Greg, but at the same time, if you can borrow like $1 million at 1%, like why wouldn't you?
You're
You gotta live
absolutely
somewhere
right.
too.
You're totally right. But there's two things to be concerned with. One is you can't leave and bring your house with you when the country goes to heck in a handbasket, which I'm hoping doesn't happen. But the portability of real estate ain't so friggin' good. Okay. So let's remember that. And more importantly, I'm going to place a bet that within 5 years, capital gains on principal residences in Canada gone, because they don't exist in the US. Now, the US does have interest expense can be deducted from your principal residence, can be deducted against.
You think we're going to have to start paying capital gains tax on principal residence sales?
Probably the first thing you'll have to do is only when you sell your house, but nothing is outside of the realm of possibilities. Imagine if they decide to tax gains in your house right now, even if you don't sell it.
Unrealized gains.
Unrealized gains.
That's awful. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if they would do that, but if they started taxing when you sold, what do you think that's going to do to housing prices? They're just going to go up further because no one's going to want to sell.
Or no one's going to want to buy, or no one's going to want to buy.
Exactly.
So everyone's going to. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate there, but you know what? I don't mind.
You're going to go to Nova Scotia, guys. Our real estate prices are still like 10 years ago.
All good. A hard asset like real estate is way better than anything called bonds. And I will go back, Mike, and agree with you. You should use borrowed money to lever hard asset purchases. Why? Because the rates on the borrowing are as low as they've ever been. You borrow $100 today, and effectively you only have to pay back what, $65 when your mortgage matures, or in 5 years, and do it over 30 years. And it's like you borrowed $100, and over 30 years you're effectively paying back, I don't know, like 20 cents. Like it's crazy, right? The debasement of the currency that'll take place in that time. So yes, you should wisely borrow to invest in hard assets. That doesn't mean you go 100% of your cash flow. It doesn't mean you go to 100% in any one hard asset, meaning you don't borrow everything you can to put into Bitcoin or, less so in real estate. But point is, yes, it pays to use leverage, especially when rates are advantageous to the borrower. And that's what they are right now.
I think Mike and I are a little susceptible to narratives and trend. I think we both were considering like leveraging our house and getting a mortgage and buying Bitcoin at the top.
I did tweet that, but that was like a joke. But I think a lot of people took that seriously.
I was seriously considering it because I was just caught up.
It's not a bad idea. Yeah. Had I done that, at the time, because that was like 2019 or something when I tweeted that. Like, it would, in hindsight, great advice.
Well, Ledin in Ontario. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. Like, so Canada sometimes doesn't have as many Bitcoin companies as other places, but we have some pretty cool stuff going on here. Like Ledin is, Canadian-based company, and they launched the first Bitcoin mortgage, right? Mm-hmm. You can buy a house with Bitcoin, and both the house and the Bitcoin become collateral. But they're actually looking at the opposite, which is what you guys are talking about letting people take their house and then buy Bitcoin with it.
You can do that now with the line of credit.
Correct.
The rates are like 2%.
Yeah.
The thing about Ledin, I would just caution people, any kind of leverage, like we've seen the first part of this year, we had a lot of narratives getting pushed out, even from Michael Saylor, unfortunately, who influenced a lot of people. And that affected even me. Like I almost leveraged my house and bought Bitcoin and through Ledin. And I almost borrowed against my Bitcoin to go and, buy another property and do different things. If I had have taken on all that leverage at 69,000 or 60,000 or even 55,000, I would be in a world of hurt right now because we're down 50%. And if you're using leverage and collateralizing, I would suggest that people like Greg, you're good for talking about this. You're one of you actually catch some heat from the Bitcoin maxis sometimes for not being 100% all in Bitcoin, but like it's only rational to to like make your own personal decisions based on how you can sleep at night and how, how
I've
your
never managed
portfolio is
risk.
structured.
I've never managed risk by going 100% into anything. And by the way, if I'm right on where I think Bitcoin is going to go in terms of price, you don't need to have 100% of your net worth in. If you have your insurance policy, which for argument's sake, I'll say, got to get off zero. You got to have an insurance policy. But if you told me you were stopping at 10% of your total net worth, I'd be like, that's totally rational, because that 10% could become 85% of your net worth in the future if the price goes to where I think it will go. Again, though, I'm not 100% certain the price will go to where I think it'll go. So therefore, I can't be 100% all in.
And you got to be able to weather the volatility in between.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it might go to wherever, but you're living now and you have expenses now.
The best advice I can give to people is treat it as an insurance policy, and put it away, and we'll talk in 20 years. But I've spent my life trading. I look for opportunities to, arb out interesting low risk, high return trades. And, but that's been my professional career. So, there will be times when I'm higher than a certain level of exposure, and there'll be times when I'm lower, because I've always traded markets that way. But I don't pretend to give that advice to anybody else to try and do it. So let's talk in 20 years. If you have a certain number of kids or a certain net worth, do a calculation, figure out how much Bitcoin you should own for the future, and then try and dollar cost average your way into it, or set a plan to get to that level over time. And the strangest thing is, if you're not at your weighting, you actually like when prices are coming down rather than when prices are going up, because it's cheaper to get to your weight when the price of Bitcoin is coming your way, right? Coming into the bid or coming lower.
So I wanted to kind of like move the conversation a little bit back to where we're talking about bonds and stuff like that. I really, I am worried that we're going to be in a real estate crash here in Canada, and the dollar's going to go to shit. And I actually am worried. It's not just something like that Bitcoiners say. Like, I do worry that we're going to hit a real rough patch here coming up, because we do not have the economic power of the central banks in Europe and the US. We're kind of like doing this UBI thing, and our debt to GDP ratio is pretty crazy. But then I go and I look at Japan and Turkey as examples where civilization can continue in some sort of normalcy with insane money policy. Like, Japan's been at negative interest rates for a long time. And Turkey has double-digit inflation for the last 20 years. They've had double-digit inflation. It's never gone to hyperinflation. And they've actually got high central bank interest rates. They've got between 5 and 15% interest rates at the central banks. And yeah, while I'd rather live in Canada than Turkey, there's a bunch of Turkish Bitcoiners that come into the clubhouse rooms and chat with us sometimes in Cafe Bitcoin. And it's like they're just used to it. Like, life goes on. But I'm curious, Greg, what do you think first of all, how is it possible that Turkey is able to have, a G20 country is able to have double-digit inflation for 20 years and high interest rates and still function somewhat normal? And what would happen if that happened here? What's preventing Canada from turning into a Turkey, where we get super high inflation and our bonds are downgraded?
Nothing. So it's only math. Turkey is a G20, correct? The difference is the Turkish lira has actually been destroyed on cross-currency foreign exchange trading, right? So the Turkish lira has plummeted against the US dollar over that time. Therefore, owning Bitcoin in lira is actually way more attractive than owning Bitcoin in US dollars for Turkish citizens. But you can say they put up with it, but any rational citizen would prefer not to. Here's a story from the Weimar Republic, right? That you went into a pub in the Weimar Republic days, and you actually paid for your rounds of beers at the beginning of the drinking session, because it was so much cheaper to do it right up front than waiting until the end of the night when prices went up, because the value of the purchasing power had gone down. you can say citizens survive. That's not much survival. It's, you talk about places like Argentina where they've defaulted 4 times. In my career, Argentina has defaulted 4 times, which means every citizen has been stolen from by the nation 4 successive times. And that's no way to build wealth. And then you flipped out you threw out the Japan example. Look, Japan is a nation of savers. They export savings to the rest of the world. The USA is the absolute opposite of that, and so is Canada. Canada needs international money to keep Canada afloat. Japan doesn't. So they're a nation of savers that can afford a high total debt to GDP. When Canada fails, it won't be because Canada's population isn't buying the bonds. It's because Canada's population cannot possibly buy the amount of bonds we need to issue. It will be the foreign investors that stop coming to Canada and just say, thank you, Canada, pay me back my money, and I'm not going to roll over my debt. I want out. And that is going to be painful. Canada will fail 10 years before the USA fails. Okay. So the good thing about this show is the USA will eventually fail as well if they don't get their act in gear and endorse Bitcoin. But in that event, Canada will have had to have failed 10 years before the USA fails. So Canada hasn't failed yet. So the USA has at least another 10 years, according to Foss. Okay. So the point is this: every single fiat fails. That's pure mathematics. The USA will be the last fiat to fail globally, but it is likely it will fail as well. Again, pure mathematics. But Canada, man, home and our home and nation land here with 3 kids. I don't want them to fail, but my God, with 3.71 times the amount of debt to GDP in Canada, we need foreign lenders to continue to show up for our bond auctions so that we can roll that debt. And you'll say, well, don't worry. If the foreigners don't show up, we'll just print the money. And I'll say, yeah, same thing happened in Venezuela. They just printed the money. And where did the money end up? On the sidewalk, because it wasn't even worth garbage. Okay. This is not what we want to happen in Canada. I assure you that we're doing a really good job of pushing ourselves in that direction. And we have a buffoon in Sussex Drive, 60 Sussex Drive in Ottawa, who says stuff like, forgive me if I don't care about monetary policy and the budget's going to balance itself. He's an absolute buffoon. And as the CEO of a country, that concerns me because it's the international investors that listen to that buffoon that says stuff like, I don't care about the budget. Well, guess what? If you're a debt lender, you better care about the budget. Anyway,
true.
it's all going circular. Like, this guy is a clown. He's an absolute clown. But we get what we pay for. You pay them.
He has nice hair, though, Greg. You got to give him that.
Yeah, well, he's got nice hair, and he's you pay them peanuts, you get monkeys, right? That's the biggest problem. Maybe we don't pay our politicians enough, but he is very dangerous for the future of my children and the value of real estate in Canada and the value of industry in Canada. So own insurance. Foss, I hope you're wrong because I love Canada. Yes, Foss, I hope you're wrong, but I also look at mathematics.
So actually, I have 2 questions. One related to what you were just talking about and what Brad initially asked about a crash in real estate. So if we are printing a ton amount of money and, hard assets are going up, a hard asset is real estate.
Yes.
Arguably. Why is it just because the economy fell so much?
Exactly, Mags. Exactly.
Okay.
Canada is rich until it isn't. It's rich until every single international company leaves Canada because our electricity grid is outdated. Leaves Canada for more greener pastures. Manufacturing leaves because it's a free market. We have a free trade agreement with the USA. Your GDP is made up of those of growing manufacturing bases and growing service sectors. And if people leave, and if I'm thinking of leaving Canada, right? I know 20 billionaires who have left Canada. That's a big tax base to try and replace. And they're leaving because they've had it. And that's not good for your denominator, which is your tax base. And when these people are leaving, it's like the equivalent of tens of thousands of ordinary citizens leaving.
Now, we did immigrate. I think they said 400,000 people immigrated into Canada this past year, compared with 500,000 in the U.S.
Okay.
So we're like 1/10 the size. But
what do you think the earnings power of those immigrants are?
I don't know.
They're not, it's not equal to even one billionaire. Okay. I love immigrants. It's a nation of immigrants, but let's be realistic. Okay. And a lot of these immigrants get subsidies to come here. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It just adds to your numerator. Okay. Like, all is good, except you got to do the math. You lose your richest and you're bringing in less privilege. That's all good. But your less privileged aren't big taxpayers. In fact, they're net tax negative.
So moving to kind of solutions is where I was going, 5 years ago with government. Like, the amount of jobs that are growing in Bitcoin is, I'm quite confident, at growing at an accelerated pace in terms of percentages. The amount of startups, the capital that's being raised.
Energy.
So
How about energy in Bitcoin?
I was getting there.
All of our resources that we could allocate to making Canada a Bitcoin nation and actually helping our energy grid using wasted resources, Max. I'm putting words in your mouth, but yes, that is our competitive advantage.
And exactly. And as manufacturing offshores, because it's becoming much more expensive in Canada to produce, I think there's gaps there definitely for companies to fill. And so what's interesting to me is, I am starting to see this embracement, particularly among miners, because it's a lot of capital. They see, I think it was Marathon who just invested almost $1 billion in mining machines. And regardless of what side you're on politically, $1 billion investment is huge for any country, right? And they take notice. So we are seeing, whether it's Senator Loomis, Tom Emmer, there's certain U.S. politicians that are starting to embrace and say, hey, come to the U.S., come to this state, you'll get $10,000 in Bitcoin. Like, that's actually happening. And I've yet to see something like that in Canada. And I hope, that they're kind of paying attention. And secondly, so a question to you guys, though, at the same time, I am seeing Bitcoin become partisan. It tends to be a lot more, right leaning. And do we think that that's kind of the nature? We're seeing Pierre slowly embrace the kind of, monetary policy. Do we think it'll become a left versus right issue as well in Canada?
I think you're already seeing that with the mining FUD.
I don't think we've seen it in Canada. Yes, definitely in the US, but I wonder if maybe Canadians are smarter.
Well, Quebec wastes more electricity with hydro, right? Like they can't use it all. Then the entire Bitcoin network uses, right?
They sell it to the US as well.
Yeah.
Similar to, and also to, I believe, the East Coast, which is why some of the miners there are mining at 2 cents Canadian, I might add, which is insane for energy pricing.
On-grid mining is in a load of hurt, okay? Because first of all, that 2 cents is probably not the true cost. And secondly, they can get pushed through tariff. And that's why miners actually left Quebec, right? Because they thought they were signing at 6 cents. And then the government said, well, you're making so much money, we're going to increase you to a higher rate. The true strength of the Bitcoin network is going to come from off-grid mining, small power mills. I talked to a guy in Florida, Mags, who is purchasing old textile factories that have the equivalent. They have a waterfall, right? A stream that used to power the water wheel that would make the whatever you call those things, the linen or the weaving machines create cotton and yarn. Those don't need the waterfall anymore because there's no textile mill there, but it still produces 1 to 3 megawatts of power. And you have a facility you can put Bitcoin miners in. And most importantly, it's off grid. That's where the future of mining is going to go, because when you're beholden to a utility that can actually interrupt you at any time, or if you're in Texas and Texas is experiencing brownouts right now, you know, what is the population going to say? Are we going to go and stop supplying a refinery or a large employer, or are we going to turn off Bitcoin miners? So, you know, the whole mining square is full of ups and downs. And basically right now, the mining square is in a down, right? Because hash is highest, difficulty is higher than ever, and the price of Bitcoin just got halved. So all of a sudden, mining, which looks so sexy 6 months ago, doesn't look so good right now. And that's the ebbs and flows of the two sides. But let me tell you, Bitcoin will solve the wasted energy component, Mike. That's important. And there will be times when a power plant, which is used as a peaker and only is needed 5% of the time of the entire year, the other 95% of the time, it should be mining Bitcoin and using its ability to create another revenue stream, as Mags has said, and flip that onto places like greenhouses that need to be heated in the wintertime, but that same generating equipment doesn't need to be used in the summertime. What should you be doing with that generating equipment? It's off grid. You should be mining Bitcoin, dispersing your costs, creating another revenue stream. And this is all going to happen, not all at once, but, you know, first of all, we had Bitcoin miners get kicked out of China. They found homes elsewhere in the West, a lot in the West. And now some of those guys are realizing, oh, it's not that great in the West because I'm getting interrupted, or the chances are I'm getting flow through tariffed, or even worse, I thought I signed, you know, and this contract was rock solid, and I didn't read the fine print, and the fine print is way uglier than what I went out and pitched to my shareholders as what I had signed.
Well, I think that's really neat too, because like, look at the US compared to Canada. We have a lot more space that's uninhabited, but also we have a lot of rural and remote communities, and a lot of those are First Nations which are not grid connected because it's too expensive to take transmission lines, especially, you know, there's a number of them in Ontario, for example. So they're currently using diesel fuel, which is pretty environmentally unfriendly to heat these places. And, you know, I'm seeing in the US, for example, I know Compass was working with a few First Nations groups there, but I have talked to one First Nations fund that helps First Nations around Canada. We have something like over 300 bands that they work with, and each kind of specializes in different things. One is, you know, renewables, another one specializes in agriculture or in storage, energy storage. And they actually, you know, are starting to kind of embrace that idea because it's all about self-sovereignty, right? The First Nations, they have their sovereign land, and this is kind of like sovereign money. And so it'd be interesting to see these communities that could, you know, embrace Bitcoin mining. It could help provide the capital to create energy infrastructure, because the government has failed to at this point, because it just has been too expensive to, you know, bring the transmission lines from the generation that's very centralized.
Correct.
In the south. Yeah.
So I'm working at Validus Power. You may or may not know, but Validus Power, a company I'm involved with, who amongst other things has signed a deal with HUD 8 to provide power for the HUD 8 Bitcoin mining rollout. Validus Power is run by an Indigenous Canadian. Validus Power is talking with the First Nations about exactly this. The level of tuberculosis in First Nations is the highest in the Canadian population because they don't get enough leafy greens. Their greenhouses, they don't grow enough. Well, imagine using Bitcoin mining to create a separation of state and money, and the heat from the miners goes into the greenhouses. I mean, it's absolutely perfect. We have the generating equipment run on natural gas and liquefied natural gas that can change the economics of entire communities all over Canada. And yes, we are having those conversations, and they are listening. And There's different bands, as you mentioned. Some are embracing it, some are pushing back. But let me tell you that there is at least a decent number of them that get the story. And yes, it could change their lives.
I think it's really cool because you create sort of a self-sustaining community. And further to what you were talking about, finding waste resources and better utilizing them. There's some place like in Mexico, and there's farms that have cow poop, right? That create methane gas, which is a potent GHG. And if you stick that into an anaerobic digester, you can then create methane, which then burns a lot more cleanly. You can both heat your farm animals, because you do, depending on where you're in, and if it does get cold. But again, it kind of speaks to that self-sustaining bit. And Canada, which does have carbon pricing, there's certain areas, certain sectors that are more likely to be affected than places that don't have a carbon price. I'm thinking like landfills, right? And landfill gas management, same thing. Methane is just leaking. Farms as well. And so capturing that landfill gas, I have seen it happen in Ontario, where it's one of the largest steel plants is actually utilizing natural gas from a landfill right next to it. But that can happen too, where it's a wasted resource, which is leaking into the air, and then it becomes eventually a cost because they need to capture and burn it, and now it's being utilized, right? I mean, same thing's happening in the oil sands. For oil and gas production, but that's the key part, especially as hash rate goes up, and it becomes more expensive if price goes down. It's finding those really cheap resources, or even getting paid to take waste. If you think of municipal solid waste, right? You pay a tipping fee to throw that out, and it's really neat to see companies filling every single niche in the space. Including taking in waste, like waste tires. PRTI in the US is actually doing that. They're creating an integrated operation, which I do think is where we're eventually head, more integrated operations, where you're actually producing the power and also Bitcoin mining, and the two kind of play together in terms of making the economics work. So we're solving, waste management issues. We're solving energy issues with more grid reliability. So I think it's a really exciting sector, and I'd like to see Canada kind of, as you say, Greg, we're resource rich. I'd like to see us kind of take that opportunity of this whole new sector that's growing, and that's the cool part. Is that this is a sector. It's financial services, but it also fills into energy, fits into agriculture production, right? And home out to Mint Green, who is going to be powering with their heat generated from their miners, Vancouver. So they have a heat offtake agreement with the city, and they're actually reducing GHGs. It's like this story that people kind of ignore, right? Where
and they're making Bitcoin infused vodka.
Damn right.
They're
are.
using the heat from the mining process to power the distillery and make vodka with it. It's amazing. Bitcoin infused booze.
Shout out to Canadian companies, right?
Yeah, Mint Green is cool. I think, like, if anybody that has any kind of doubts, like, there's a lot of people in Canada that are more progressive, and like, just because of, I guess, the way that our politics are here, there's not as much of a culture of like property rights protection and things like that. We've got a social safety net from the time you're born. You're kind of like raised with free healthcare, and the government provides for you and things like that. So we don't have that culture in the US of strong streaks of independence and freedom, maximalism, and things like that. And so therefore, a lot of people in Canada have this warped view on capitalism, and they feel like capitalism is the problem. And like the reason why the world is broken and the money is broken is because the rich people that run businesses are not doing their fair share. And that's more prevalent here, I find, when talking to my friends about money
Yep.
and Bitcoin. But it does, like, it's tough to broach that conversation, because it's like almost propaganda from birth to think that Americans are crazy. They're gun-toting dummies, and they're, money above all else, and like we got free healthcare. They don't even have free healthcare. So it's a real tough conversation to have
I
with
mean, you
Canadians.
talk about our free healthcare, though. I mean, we have less ICU beds than California, and the reason why we have all these lockdowns is because our healthcare system will just it can't handle the capacity. Any sort of rising requirements, they got to lock everything down. So I just threw that out there just because there's differences in both countries, obviously, in terms of even how they were founded, right? I mean, the US was founded by telling England to fuck off, right? So
Yeah, like they've got rights, we've got privileges, pretty much. Like they
yeah,
took their rights from protesting, taxation with no representation. We were given our privileges by
yeah.
the
They're
monarchy, and
still on our money.
yeah,
Still
we
on our
still
money.
kind of have that ethos. So I'm not saying like that the thoughts that people have in Canada are right. It's just tough conversations to have because the base layer of thinking logically about the problems in the world, people think it's capitalism here more than they do in the States. But I mean, obviously there's a lot of people in the States that think the same way. But I have conversations with my friends all the time about Bitcoin, and I get that a lot. Like, yeah, but the money's broken because of capitalism. We have to go more towards like,
I think
UBI and things like
it's
that.
an epidemic in the school system, and that's why it's how the next generation is just being raised at this
I
point.
mean, if you think you're right, if you think about the US, everyone thinks about this American dream and we're going to, I'm going to make it. Whereas in Canada, that's not the kind of thinking instilled from when we're young. But a further thing, so when I worked in economic development, I saw oftentimes if you're a startup, it is really difficult to get first customer to make your product happen, but B, just generally get capital to start a business. Most Canadian, startups, particularly tech, they have to go to the US to find funding. So, and that makes it a lot more challenging for our country as a whole, to be innovative because we see these companies exit.
That's so funny. That's exactly bringing it back to what Greg said earlier about the bonds. Like it works the same way from an international country investment perspective too. Like if there's nobody if Canada was a business like Greg said, and you were running your business, if you were telling your investors, I don't care about the bookkeeping and the profits. I just want to be nice and empathetic and have people feel good and take care of people. Well, you'd be like, I'm not investing in that. I'll donate to that. I'll do some altruistic donations for you, but I'm not going to invest in that. So like, why? Yeah, it does make sense that Greg's saying, why are foreign investors going to buy Canadian bonds if we're spending too much and we have no chance of ever paying it back?
Well,
And
and building on what Mike said, that was a great comment, Mike, in terms of, we have free healthcare. We can't afford to pay for it, and it's becoming less. It's becoming subpar when you compare it to the equivalent U.S. system. That was very astute. But in terms of culture, I've lived and worked in the United States. I went to school there, and there's huge differences. But we're more similar than you think. The Canadian system of we're capitalists with a heart, where we don't want to be taxed, but we'd like to be able to turn around and be able to donate our wealth that we generate to the causes that we see fit. But the real thing that we have to understand, again, is Canada is a ribbon of a country that's highly centralized around cities. Whereas the US is a grid, right? It's north and south, vertically integrated, east and west as well. And you just have a much more diverse economy, much more rural environments in the US compared to Canada. A statistic that I'm sure you guys know, but I need to repeat it. 90% of Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the US border. Think about that for a second.
That's insane. That's crazy. Growing up on the east coast of Canada and Cape Breton, farthest away from the US.
Yeah.
From like New York and all of that.
Uh-huh.
When I moved here to Ontario, I was literally blown away that I was like an hour drive from the United States. I'm like, wait a second, I thought we're so far away. It's so different.
Yeah, and then all the big cities. So Montreal.
Recently, Greg, isn't it true too that like just that one little zone in Toronto sort of area, like
Yeah,
Southwestern
the
Ontario
Golden
area.
Horseshoe, yeah, Greater Toronto
Like,
area.
more people live in that area, and that's actually south. It's actually almost like if Canada was just a line,
Yeah.
it would be in the United States.
Yeah,
because
there
it's
are
just
Oh
one
some.
yeah,
line.
yeah.
Yeah, some U.S. states are a little higher
Oh, the
than
entire
us.
state of
Yeah.
North Dakota. The
Yeah, exactly.
entire state of North Dakota is further north than Ontario. Sorry, than Toronto, and then the Point Paley, which is down near Windsor and goes out into Lake Erie, is the furthest point south in Canada. It is actually further south than the Northern California border. So Point Paley has Oregon and Washington state above it in terms of where it sits in the on a latitude, right? So, we are a ribbon. We are run around cities. So there is, just the diversity of our economy is not the same as it is in the United States. And that's a risk. And we have to get politicians that understand how to run a country that way versus promising everything to everybody, but not being able to pay for it. And that's very dangerous for the future of our children. You may not have seen me say stuff like boomers are the most selfish generation that I've ever seen. Well, I'm a boomer, and I'm embarrassed for boomers as being so soft that they are pulling forward riches at the expense of our children. We are a very soft generation. From a group of Canadians, my granddad fought in both world wars, was awarded the Order of the British Empire. I promise you, he would have been a Bitcoiner. Okay. He understood freedom. He fought for what was right. And this stuff about give me stuff because I'm entitled to it and I'm privileged and I live in Canada, you guys failed math, and it's really embarrassing.
And that's why I kind of worry about the future of the population turning adversarial towards Bitcoiners that have found this out and have taken this productive protest against the corruption of fiat money and called it right. And we're doing this for altruistic reasons, also to protect ourselves and our family, and we're right. But the culture of Canadian compliance is a challenge for people that did have this right if we continue on this path where the majority of Canadians will just go with consensus. And if consensus in Canada is, well, I guess we're going to have to do a wealth tax of 70% for anybody that got gains from real estate or assets, we just have to claw back your profits. I mean, that I could understand why the 20 billionaire folks left, because they're like, it's what Ray Dalio said actually right before the pandemic started. He said that he predicted, because of money printing, because of the problems with the pension, unfunded pension plans, like you were talking about, Greg, that the government would be forced to, they can only do three things. They can only raise taxes, lower interest rates, or print money. They can't raise interest rates because we're in crazy debt levels, and the middle class would just be eviscerated if debt levels were risen. You'd completely lose the wealth effect, because people in Canada, because of all the CERB and everything, feel wealthy. Their real estate's going up, so they take more loans on their homes. They upgrade their homes. They build the fence. They put in the hot tub. They spend in the local economy because they feel wealthy. It's actually like phantom wealth, like you were saying earlier. And when this balance sheet comes back and the red side starts to show up more, when the housing prices start to come down, people are not going to be in a good shape because they've spent too much. They're over leveraged, and they haven't been saving. They feel wealthy. They're out spending, and like, the only thing that the government can do is try to trap rich people. This is what Ray Dalio said: try to trap rich people into the country and raise the taxes on them and print money. Like, they can't raise rates, they have to print money, and they have to trap rich people. So like, that leads to class warfare, where the poor need a scapegoat and they blame the rich people, just like the vaccinated are blaming the unvaccinated right now. It's a political narrative, and people are just going along with these lines. It's like these scapegoats are being created from people that choose not to get vaccinated. It's like they're the problem for everything. That's what's being pushed in Canada, and that's kind of being propagated everywhere I look on social media in Canada. It's like people are just blaming the unvaccinated for everything. I mean, the rich people are going to be blamed for everything. The people that took their own financial lives and sovereignty into account and protected themselves from these money printers, used Bitcoin as a shield, they're going to be looked at as the problem. So that's where I kind of worry, and why I read like history and want to have these conversations with people about like how do we, one, properly educate and get our message out to talk about things like Mags, like you talk about, with how Bitcoin's actually going to be good for the economy and help the planet and incentivize the adoption of clean energy and renewable energy, and why Bitcoin is, it's capitalism is not the problem. It's the money printing's the problem. And, you know, I'd rather stay here and educate and invest in Canada and Canadians doing this stuff. But I'm also thinking of leaving, because I don't want to be caught in this scenario where I'm the guy that's looked at as the scapegoat, and like this mob comes for me and tries to steal my Bitcoin from me because I was smart enough to get it.
But you've started building your citadel, right? You
Yeah,
got your
but
citadel going.
I did, but I started building it in Nova Scotia.
Oh,
Do you have a moat?
I've got lobster traps all around the house.
Nice.
Oh boy.
Nice.
You know what would be awesome though is if politicians embraced Bitcoin, we actually put some in our treasury, and because we sold all our gold, right? So Bank of Canada owns no gold, but forward thinkers would say, well, you know, if we can start amassing some Bitcoin, particularly using our natural resource and stranded energy, you know, there is something that can share the wealth for even the people that haven't done their homework and don't understand what money printing is, don't understand what hard assets are. But you have to protect those people too. So that's the kind of safety net that I would love to endorse on behalf of Canadians, where we have a political party who views the wealth of a nation as importantly, let's say, and I'm going to use the word El Salvador. Now, they're not without their challenges, but here's the funny thing. We have dual languages in Canada, right? French and English, and my wife is French Canadian, and I'm going to say this. We shouldn't probably worry too much about speaking French. We should probably learn Spanish. If we don't get our act in gear, we're going to be reporting to El Salvador. Okay. So perhaps Canadians should learn Spanish. I say it because I'm sincere that I think that many nations are going to start adopting Bitcoin, and the first movers are going to be the winners in the long run. And I would love Canada to be part of that.
You're on mute.
Oops. Thanks. I was saying, do you guys, Mags, Mike, Greg, do you, like, one at a time, like, do you guys worry about those same things I was just talking about? Are you thinking about potentially maybe leaving, or what's your thoughts on this in the next 5 years?
I've thought about leaving. It's a challenge. I think that's a decision that you have to undertake for yourself. Like, I do have a dual passport. I'm Polish, but I don't know if Poland's the better. Germany, certainly. My partner's German, and they have excellent taxation when it comes to Bitcoin. But I think it comes down to what kind of lifestyle do you want? For me, I love BC. I live in a rural town. I have mountains, the ocean, and I love my community. And so basically for us, we would have to go somewhere where it's a better lifestyle than we currently have. And so maybe that means it's tropical, but you still have to have access to healthcare. That's good. Right. And want to feel that kind of community. So it's a challenge. Plus you have to think about the rest of your family, right? If you have aging parents, pets, if you're traveling, sometimes it's tough to travel with the quarantines. So you have to kind of look at the broader perspective and, you know, can my family visit me? And so again, it's a personal choice.
Yeah, I would echo what Mag said. It's like I was born here. I've lived here my whole life. My family's here. It would be very hard to just pick up and move at this point. So,
and I agree with both you guys. I prefer not to. I'm going to do everything I can to try and fight to the last moment to help Canada get over the hump, because it's a great country. And I believe that we can keep it great, or at least turn the tide from the decline that we've been going in. But it's part of education, right, guys? We really need to, we're battling against the education in the traditional schooling system, the Keynesian brainwashing that happens in universities. On that front, I'm part of a project that's putting together an education platform on finance for anyone in the world that
Nice.
wants to. Yeah, it's run by a surgeon out of Madison, Wisconsin, but we have one guy from Whistler, British Columbia. He's a Kiwi living in Whistler. We have a guy in Australia. We have a a German living in Croatia. We have another hedge fund manager from the USA. And then we've, expanding our reach a bit with a Spanish influencer. Point being, we just want to help educate people. Bitcoiners might be viewed as off the wall, but the reality is we've actually done our homework, and it's the other people who are intellectually lazy who have not done their homework. Some of them work in banks and they don't want to hear the reality, but over time, banks are going to be disintermediated by Bitcoin as well. So they better start learning. And overall, if we're at the front of the bus and we're driving the bus rather than being a late player, I think Canada can really have an advantage here, and I'd love to be part of that. And it starts with guys like Pierre Poilievre, and I'm really excited, Mags. I didn't think of you off the top of my head. I did think of Cumby, so I told Pierre I would put him in touch with Cumby, but I'll put you and Pierre, you and Cumby in touch with Pierre, and hopefully, he's going to keep spreading his concerns and educating Canadians. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I still have the will. I don't want to leave Canada, but I do own 2 properties in the US just in case. So we'll see if that is an escape valve for me.
So that's all great to think about. And I'm also kind of struggling with the choice as well for family reasons. And my wife's not really a Bitcoin enthusiast. She's Portuguese. Her whole family's here, so family is super important to her. And I gotta wait for Bitcoin, I think, to go up to like 300,000 or so before I can afford to move every single person in her family out of Canada to come with us. So
but the exit tax is going to kill you then compared to now. Well,
Oh,
hey,
yeah,
this
that's
dip
true.
is a benefit.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, it is. I hope that people do not go too far down that path of accepting social credit scores. Like if it gets to the point where Canadians are so compliant that it gets to like Australia, where they
It's
start
terrifying.
to, it is terrifying. I never thought Australia would get to the point where it is right now. And, this is a compliance problem. Like people just they're just accepting everything. And small businesses are getting destroyed because of these vaccine mandates. Like they're getting fined. They're going to be fined $100,000, I think it is, for not checking passports, vaccine passports or whatever. So they don't want to comply with or resist it because their business is already suffering. So it's like this force that's being applied to entrepreneurs, and people just aren't really standing up against it. But now we're starting to see like people are standing up against it and making their voices heard, at least demonstrating that there is a limit to how much they're going to accept.
Did you see that truckers, freedom truckers for 2022? I mean, that's something that's, I like that. And I am a small business owner. I'm a part owner of 8 Irish pubs in Montreal for the last 20 years. Yeah, I've been a partner in these. Well, it's cool until you try and wrestle with COVID. Here's an example of some of the misincentives. One of our pubs is in a very working class area. So after we were closed down the first time, right, the lockdown, and all the citizens of Canada got money deposited in their bank account, people of this working class area felt so rich that sales were up 50% over 2019. Okay. Wow. 2020 was a wash, obviously. 2021, when we were open, sales were up 50%. Now, they could feel rich and go out and buy beers and Irish stew and all the stuff they do at our pubs. But the reality, is that how you run an economy? It is not. Okay. And it was, then we got shut down the second time. The question is now, how many of our staff do we lose because they realize, why would I want to work in an industry that can be shut down at any point in time? So, we've invested 25 years of time and effort into starting these 8 Irish restaurants. We employ over 300 people. And all I want to do is get out. I don't want to be part of that business anymore. And that's pretty, Go ahead, Max.
No, I was just saying I'm seeing that too. Like last time I went to Barbarians in December, I've never seen it so empty. And Ontario put in that you have to close at 11. Not like 3 more hours is going to make a big difference but it might for the business because we would have stayed longer, right? It's really tragic. And I think what sucks about that too is like you see all these small businesses closing. I mean, it's challenging enough as a small business to compete with large, thinking about like Amazon, right? And so you have these little shops close, and you start to get more larger parties that just, cookie cutter restaurants, let's say, because the little pub couldn't stay open. And it's just kind of a sad state for Canada to see that. And then you get unrealistic expectations. Like, for example, we're a small business, right? CoinKite, we ship physical products. But people continuously expect Amazon delivery. Like in Ontario, I can get something next day. It's not how we operate as a small business, right? Like we make our products in Canada, but there's these unrealistic expectations, right? And people get upset when we ship to other countries because Amazon sets up, these global distribution and we say you have to pay duties, but people are very like, what is this thing? Why do I have to pay a duty? Because these big conglomerates set a certain set of expectations that makes it really challenging for good small companies to compete in.
These conversations we're having right now would have been so foreign 2 years ago to have conversations like this. And that makes me kind of wonder like how like it's actually not that unfathomable to think we could be at a spot where there would be a major economic collapse in the next year or two. Like it is not it's not a low risk. And especially with like everything we've talked about, the way that they're printing money to try to make people feel wealthy, the way that real estate's gone crazy, the problems with the bond markets where foreign investors are looking at Canada saying like, this is a poorly run country. I'm not going to invest here. And every country's having that. And it reminds me, I went through the book When Money Dies recently. And this book, When Money Dies, everybody should read it, or at least go get the audiobook, listen to it on 1.5x speed, whatever. Just it's kind of dense, but it tells the story, which kind of is eerily similar to now, where the hyperinflation event that happened in Weimar, Germany, it was a very challenging time because they were paying war reparations and they had the stock market crash to deal with. And I mean, while we don't have like war reparations, it is a similar level of debt that needs to be repaid because we've borrowed so much. Like our spending, if you look at spending on a chart, the last time spending was this high was during World War II. The last time debt to GDP was during World War II. And we're not even in wartime right now. And we're spending more than we've ever spent in conflict time. So like the parallels back then to what the general population was doing, it was like at one point there was millions of Germans that were supplementing their income through trading Forex currencies and speculating in Forex currencies in the stock market. And that was, I think it was up to 20% or 10% of the population was actually making more money speculating and doing this degenerate gambling behavior than actually running working for a business and like doing something productive in society. And there was tons of money to be made because when the money's just printed and shipped to you, it just feels like you're rich and you're going to go spend. And then when the money's devaluing, you want to get rid of it. And when I was home in the summer, I got to say like 10 times I had the conversation with people in Cape Breton saying that like they're short staffed. The young people don't want to work at these jobs. They can stay home and get paid CERB and then go do something else. Like there was reduced hours all over the place. It just feels eerily similar. Like the more I learn about history and previous bubble pops, the more it feels like what's happening to us right now with cryptocurrency and NFT speculation and Wall Street bets culture. And like, man, there was a survey that was done recently that said up to, I think it was 5% of Americans quit their jobs because they were making money trading cryptocurrencies. And 8% of people knew someone who quit their jobs because of trading cryptocurrency. So that's like 12% of young Americans have left the workforce to go trade cryptocurrencies and NFTs.
I hope they took profits.
I'm going to plug my NFT project right now. All right.
Go, Mike.
So this is the Drooling Ape Bus Club. Go to drooling8bus.club for some of the greatest NFTs on Bitcoin. These aren't Ethereum NFTs. These are Bitcoin NFTs. So they're allowed.
So this is funny that
I don't know. Some Bitcoin Puritans might still.
No, I don't.
disagree.
Exactly.
well,
You
the,
can
fu-
only
the
use Bitcoin this one way.
the origin of the drooling apes.
I know.
is
You
kind of
created
funny.
it.
I
And then
was I was super triggered by the
Are you guys chilling your bags?
No, the funny part is, this is the funniest part. Brad made this as anti-NFT propaganda, right? He wanted to say how stupid NFTs are. And what we did, we made NFTs out of the propaganda. So, and now it's gotten really popular.
I actually
So-
paid people a bunch of money. I was so triggered by all the celebrities adding JPEGs, that like house price JPEGs to their Twitter profiles. I was like, I'm gonna start paying artists to make memes to make fun of all these stupid JPEG people. And then I paid a bunch of people to make these hilarious memes, and then everybody started being like, well, actually we could make some Bitcoin by doing this. Let's put it on Counterparty and call it Drooling Ape Bus Club. So this is what happens when money dies. You know, you make money on JPEGs, you make money on coins.
Got to stack sats.
So and lastly, I'll close the rant or the observation with the conversation I had with Jeff Booth on the podcast about 6 months ago. He had described to me what his family went through when the interest rates rose in the 90s in Canada. And I wasn't really aware of that because I was poor and grew up on the east coast of Canada, and we didn't have many assets or anything there. And everybody in my circle anyway was just getting enough hours to get their 400 hours and then go on Pogie and then, you know, work on some side gig or something like that. So it wasn't really more about striving to become an entrepreneur and get assets. It was about, like, you know, enjoying life and going having parties and playing music and writing songs and plays and doing art and stuff like that while you're on Pogie. And then you got a side hustle or whatever. But, you know, on the podcast, he talked about how his family was entrepreneurial and they had a lot of assets and they had a lot of real estate. And when interest rates rose to like 9% or something, and they just got decimated. And a lot of people in the 90s lost a ton of value when the interest rates rose. So it does make me think like something is going to happen soon, whether it's an interest rate spike, they can't print money anymore, or extreme rise in taxation. There's going to be some kind of policy error, and we're starting to see all the signs of what happened in previous times of history when money dies feels a lot like what's happening right now. And I don't know that the Canadian government is competent enough to deal with how to stop the problem, because they're just playing follow the leader and they're not even doing that right.
Actually, they can't stop it, right? It's mathematically impossible. So this is the interesting thing. It's what do you do to switch to a parallel system? We need to nurture a parallel network. And Jeff and I have talked long about this. When you have a network transfer from the fiat store of value, which it is not, to a Bitcoin store of value, you need to run two networks in parallel. Because when you do a network transfer, you don't just flick a switch, right? When you're switching over from DOS to Apple or, some other operating system, let's say, a smart company runs things in parallel to make sure everything's is repeatable and it runs without a flaw. I hope that Canada will start embracing the Bitcoin standard as its store of value savings account. Fiat is good as a checking account, right? Fiat eliminates the need to barter, trade two cats for a dog, etc. You just have a price, you pay it in fiat, but don't store the value of your time and energy in fiat. Store the value of your time and energy in Bitcoin. That's your savings account, and fiat is your checking account. And Canada can run its finances the same way. We should want to be able to control a currency that can smooth out the ebbs and flows of a traditional economy, the economic cycle. We have to continue printing because the debt spiral, as I've described before, ensures that we need to continue printing, which ensures that fiat will continue to lose its money, its value over time. but you want the parallel system, and that's called Bitcoin. So Jeff's story was absolutely, you know, I've spent 8 hours driving in the car with him back and forth from Montreal to Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. I got a PhD lesson for free on those 8 hours. Okay. The guy is brilliant. He started a tech company. It was a precursor actually to Amazon. They grew too fast. He almost lost everything, absolutely everything in his entrepreneurship, and then turned it around, wrote the best book I've ever read. Okay. Bar none. The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth is the best book I have ever read. I'm proud to call him a friend. And I think Canada should be really, really proud to have him at the forefront of our push to this parallel network that will save all Canadians.
One thing that I want to throw out too is if you're Canadian, yes, you know, consider buying Bitcoin, and there's a number of ways. And because Canadians, we actually have tax advantaged accounts, tax-free savings accounts where you can put up to, is it 75,000 or we just upped it? Is it closer to 80,000? Something, yeah, something around that range. You can actually leverage that so you don't get taxed on the capital gains when you sell. But at the same time, you know, we've been talking about where Canada's headed. And if we do kind of lead to unprecedented times where there's haircuts, whether that's, you know, they just take a haircut off your investments, like in Cyprus, they just, you know, siphon off some money that you had in an account. You know, you can also be prepared by store your own Bitcoin within your own custody. And you know, it's really difficult for them, if probably impossible, to take a haircut there. And then third thing is support Canadian businesses that are Bitcoin, right? We have tahinis in Ontario. You know, we're a small business. We manufacture products in Canada. We make security devices. And I have to say, we have announced pre-orders for Mark IV NFC, baby. And we're launching 3 products, guys. We have the Cold Card 4, which has some improvements, but the 3 is still perfectly sound. And it's still an awesome device. We're actually not discontinuing it. We're also launching 2 new products. I know a lot of you love the Open Dime. Well, we're launching something called Sats Card, which is 10x the Open Dime. So there's 10 slots. So this one you can only use once you open it.
Oh, man.
But this one has 10 slots.
How many can I buy?
However many you want. Oh, and they can be branded too. You can do like, oh my God. Well, it has to be one picture, but you could put one of your monkeys on it.
I want.
Yeah, you can have one of those monkeys. You totally
could.
No, seriously. Okay, we'll get in touch after that. And the third product we're launching is Seed Signer. So it's a card that you tap. So if you have a Lightning device, so you can have your own. It's a wallet, stores as private keys, and if for those folks, you know, maybe in developing countries they can't afford to buy something like an expensive wallet, it's a cheaper option. So you can, you know, secure your mobile wallet, you can secure your Lightning. You know, it's on chain only. But the other cool part is you can use it in a multi-sig, so you can have a cold card and the card, so you can multi-sig tap, and then that opens you know, various options for collaborative custody, like people that use on-chain capital. So anyways, 3 products, and you know, we're a small business, but we hit hard. We make categories. We make new categories in Bitcoin. So
that's awesome, Mags.
That's shout out.
That's awesome. Is that Rodolfo?
Yep.
That is so cool. I met
cool.
him at a Bitcoin meetup. Ali was there as well from the Real Tahini. So we had this in right near your part of the world, Brad, in Kingston Kitchener Waterloo area. There's a brewery there called Innocente, and we've had some Bitcoin meetups there. The last time we had probably 300 people. Bitcoiners, and these are solid people. And Rodolfo was there, and he gave a great speech, and Ali was there with his you know, serving up briskets and everything. It was just a great time. And yeah, these are examples of people both of whom are immigrants, by the way. So if anyone thinks Foss is a white supremacist fucker, I am not. I am absolutely 100% supportive of the immigrant population in Canada. And I love Ali. He is doing great things, and we're trying to model his success in our restaurants in Montreal, by the way. So we want to be a Bitcoin friendly Irish pub chain in Montreal. So yeah, great work. All in support of the future for Canada.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we've been going for a while here. I think we got the point. We got to be prepared for volatility. And even though Bitcoin is also volatile, I'd rather have a lot of my net worth sitting in Bitcoin than sitting in, assets that I don't have sovereignty over. I do think that we're, Bitcoiners, we have this meme in 21 million divided by infinity, or what is infinity divided by 21 million?
Yeah.
And I do think we're kind of not in that paradigm yet. I think eventually we're going to get there. Like right now, I think we are in the infinity divided by infinity paradigm where money is dying and there's just rampant speculation. Everybody's out on the risk curve trying to just make money while it's easy to do so. But I do think eventually we are going to get there where it's going to be, people will realize that you've got to take your chickens back to roost and start counting them. And the 21 million meme, I think, is going to matter in the long term. Oh, what's Mike got there?
Oh, he's got some art. He's got some Bitcoin art. Infinity divided by 21 million. That's a fractal encrypt. That's a pretty awesome that you got one. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's cool. So
very cool.
Closing this off. I mean, count me in for any kind of initiatives to educate lawmakers or initiatives where we need to kind of work together to try to have influence over education anywhere. I'm definitely interested in supporting Canadian entrepreneurs, and I know there's a lot of us Bitcoiners that want to work on this. So Foss, if you got any anything brewing, I'd be happy to help wherever I can. And yeah, I'd rather do that and help influence people to have sanity rather than leave Canada. I really don't want to leave.
I agree, 100%. I agree. On that basis, watch out for Validus Power. We have 400 megawatts of power that is going to be mining Bitcoin. Okay, that's a neat amount of power supporting the Bitcoin network. So hopefully someday we'll move it to the indigenous communities and other communities that will embrace separation of state and money. It's a win-win proposition, and as a proud Canadian, I'm going to keep fighting for this. I'm not quite Jack Mallers, I'm not quite Brad Mills, but I want to die on this hill as well. So let's see if we can get there.
We do hit pretty hard. We have some pretty strong Canadian Bitcoiners, I'd say.
I think we punch above our weight in the Bitcoin community, that's for sure. Rodolfo is unbelievable. Jeff Booth is unbelievable. Brad, you're doing a great job. Mike, it's great to meet you. And Mags, as always, smiling and cheerful, and it'll go a long way. I just sent you that email introduction to Pierre, okay? So Pierre Poilievre, I hope he continues to do his stuff in the House of Parliament in Canada, and we'll all keep rowing in the same direction for our children. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys coming on. We're gonna have to do round 2 sometime soon, maybe in a month or so. We'll come and check back. Thanks,
you guys are great.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice meeting you, Mike. Great work, buddy. Good night. Good night.
Bye.